In fact, the paper is still under development, so allow me to start with that. The genocide in Gaza has revived the question around the political role for the university under capitalism. The universities has historically supported the controlling class. Under Enlightenment, the universities supported the bourgeois role as in feudalism, and during liberal time, they played a role within the within capitalism, while providing a space for pluralism and freedom and allowing for theoretical discussions, abstract discussions, with reform and academic nature, but they were free of real discussion to turn it into an awareness, proletarian awareness. While in the current times, the universities continue playing this role by reproducing the neoliberal ideology through their structures, policies, and the knowledge production systems there. This paper discusses the different forms of student activism in the Western and Arab universities through a comparative analysis that is based on the Marxist political economies, to see how the differences between the ideological roles of the university and their material conditions, how they produce different forms of protest and compliance within this context. As for the university campuses in the American universities during war in Gaza, many Western universities, particularly the elite ones, witnessed massive student campaigns in support of Palestine and rejection to the Israeli genocide in Gaza. These protests were part of an larger international movement by students in more than 20 countries. Students in Britain and the US, Australia, Belgium, Netherlands, France organized massive rallies and educational sit-downs and symbolic occupy of headquarters to pressure the leadership of the universities to disengage from the military companies and military support for Israel or investment in Israel. As many comments pointed out from different universities, the institutional neutrality was used as a tool to oppress any of these movements. Also, the university administrations were under pressure by Zionist lobbies to quell and oppress the student activism. Many organizations like Brandy Center and Anti-Defamation League, One Stand With Us, and Lawfare Project use the legal channels, including submitting complaints, classifying criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism, to force the universities to take disciplinary measures against the protesting students, like an organization called AMSHA that says it is combating anti-Semitism in the universities, redefined anti-Semitism in a way that equals anti-Zionism and intolerance. And this was coupled with a strong pressure by the donors. Major donors threatened with withdrawing their support in response to chaos in the university campuses and pressuring the universities to take a pro-Israel position. These legal, political, and financial pressures constitute the university administration's responses to the student protests as they seek to delegitimize the protests and to separate the university from political criticism. As a result, the university administrations monitored their faculty members and dismissed some of students and some faculty members, and even allowed for the police interference in some cases. These responses did not go unchallenged, as the university administrations were subject to strong criticism and sometimes led to counter mobilization, a matter that increased the expansion of protests. While in the universities, in most of the Arab universities, the student protests were mostly contained or dismantled or were pushed into more digital and symbolic forms of expression. Some institutions witnessed a limited amount of protest within the campuses, but these remained exceptions. There were student protests in a limited number of Jordanian and Tunisian and the American University in Beirut. Although Egypt is the only Arab country that has borders with Gaza, yet its universities were silent, suspiciously silent. And their students were oppressed for more than 10 years, and 17 students were killed since 2013. Also, most of the Palestinian universities also were silent as related to mobilization against war on Gaza, Israeli war on Gaza. The Birzeit University in the West Bank is an exception where the administration and the Union of Workers and the students joined the protest and facing genocide by organizing demonstrations and issuing public statements and submitting letters and holding also initiatives for education, distance or education for Gazans. This has increased the Israeli response to a university where dozens of the students and faculty members were arrested. Also, the university campus also was subject to an attack by the Israelis. As for the theoretical framework, I'll start with the liberal analysis. The liberal analysis attributes the differences in student protests against genocide in Gaza to the differences in the political freedoms and institutional independence and forms of governance. In the Western liberal democracies, there are universities and communities that ensure, at least superficially, ensure the freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, a matter that allows for organized public student movements, whereas many Arab universities act within a limited margin of institutional margin, and where they monitor political expression within the larger state policies of control. Many of the initiatives coordinate with the security services to contain the students' councils or dissolve them and manage that without any transparency, making the political protests something as very risky. Where the official oppression in these contexts is proactively and continuously is active within the state structures that criminalizes public expression of opposition. In a nutshell, this liberal view attributes protest to the level of political freedom and to what the state allows for, and ignores why people protest. The Marxist criticism considers that as an ideological reflection, as it deals with the political forms as being reasons, not results for the social relations. Thus, connecting the absence of protests in the Arab universities with the political regime can be historically refuted. Most of the revolutions, mostly, they are born under the most oppressive regime, although the ruling regimes in the Arab world considered the student frameworks as something bearable, and the Arab universities established centers for radical and Islamic mobilization. And the student activism played a pivotal role during important times of the modern Arab political history, as happened in the 50s and 60s during the battles for liberation, and also the protests against Camp David Agreement and the First and Second Intifadas, and even during Al-Karama protests in 2011. The variation in student protests between the Western and Arab universities can be understood by analyzing the structural contradiction between the ideology of the university and the conditions of its existence. The Western universities have a system of liberal values and present themselves as an academic or independent organization that protects critical thinking and democracy and is committed to international values of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and human rights. Yet their physical structure reveals an integration in the international capitalism because it relies on research contracts with the major companies and investments in military sectors and government investment related to imperialist projects. So the universities in reality are services formed based on the political economy and the strength of the state and the geopolitical coalitions. This structural contradiction between the ideological values of the university and its physical position is determinant to the level of protest within the campuses because the university administrations act within a system of contradicting incentives, with using violence, oppression to the protests might lead to political reactions as this affects the image of the university and might lead pressures by the graduates and the donors and also might lead to intensive media coverage and calls for reform and accountability. That's why the administrations find themselves having to keep a minimum margin for student mobilization or managing the protests in a way that is well managed and acceptable to the public. Yet this margin is narrowing when protests are related to Israel, where the political sensitivity and restrictions related to funding and political coalitions increase. Thus, the Arab universities are not based on ideological mask, the same one that is used in the humanitarian or human discourse, because the Arab universities have their positions within the national economy lists and have limited margin of independence, where the production of knowledge is subject to tough monitoring as part of the public rule and control. That's why universities are integrated within the state authoritarian structures and move in harmony with the security services in order to contain the student activism and undermine any political organization within the university campus. Also, the security services in the Arab countries try to quell any form of protest to avoid any Israeli threats that include direct occupations such as in Lebanon and Syria, or military attacks as in Iraq or Yemen, and the demographic threats or threats to the regime as in Jordan and Lebanon. And under this difficult situation, the protests against Israel within the universities are considered as potential sabotage acts and something also that undermine the stability of the political regime. In addition, the strategic economic interests of the Arab regime within the international liberal system push for putting off these protests to keep up their relations with the international systems. And this relation is a structural harness that limits the protest. And so the Arab universities structure turns the contradiction into silence instead of turning them into visible protests, because the university leadership is an extension to the state ideological structure and oppress the expression of protest, even with the public in support with the Palestinian cause. And because the ideology that can give legitimacy to the protests, such as the freedom, the academic liberal freedom, does not produce the same effect that it produces in the Western context. Thank you.